Tenet is a 2020 science fiction action thriller film directed and written by Christopher Nolan, who also produced the film with his wife, Emma Thomas. A co-production between the United Kingdom and the United States, it stars John David Washington, Robert Pattinson, Elizabeth Debicki, Michael Caine and Kenneth Branagh. The film follows a former CIA agent who learns how to manipulate the flow of time to prevent an attack from the future that threatens to annihilate the present world. Nolan continued his relationship with Warner Brothers and his production company Syncopy for the film's production and distribution. Nolan took more than 5 years to write the screenplay after deliberating about Tenet's central ideas for over a decade. Pre-production began in late 2018 and casting took place in March 2019, and principal photography lasted 6 months from May to November in Denmark, Estonia, India, Italy, Norway, the United Kingdom and the United States. Cinematographer Hoyt van Hoytema shot on a 65mm film and IMAX. After being delayed 3 times because of the COVID-19 pandemic, Tenet was finally released to the United Kingdom on August 26, 2020 and the United States on September 3, 2020 in IMAX 35mm and 70mm. It was the first Hollywood tentpole to open in theaters after the pandemic and grossed $365 million worldwide on a $200 million budget, making it the 5th highest-grossing film of 2020, but also a box office disappointment. The film received generally positive reviews from critics who praised its ambition, direction, musical score, VFX, action sequences, and cast performances, particularly from Washington, Debicki, and Pattinson, but received criticism towards its complicated story and difficult-to-hear sound mixing. It won Best Visual Effects at the 93rd Academy Awards, but was also nominated for Best Production Design. The cast includes John David Washington as the protagonist, a CIA operative and later revealed the founder of Tenet. Robert Pattinson as Neil, the protagonist's handler. Elizabeth Debicki as Catherine or Kate Barton, niece of Sir Frederick Barton, art appraiser, and Santal's estranged wife. Dimple Kapadia as Priya Singh, an Indian arms trafficker. Michael Caine as Sir Michael Crosby, a British intelligence officer and a contact of Priya Singh. Kenneth Branagh as Andrei Santo, a British domiciled Russian oligarch from the fictional Soviet-era closed city of Solsik 12, who is communicating with the future. And Aaron Taylor-Johnson as Eves, a Tenet military commander who rescues the protagonist Neil and Kat in Tallinn. Writer and director Christopher Nolan conceived the ideas behind Tenet over a course of 20 years, but began working on the script in 2014. The title, as well as being a palindrome, is an illusion of the Santos Square, inspired by the feeling of how he imagined Sergio Leone made Once Upon a Time in the West in 1968. Nolan tried not to watch any spy movies that might influence him while making Tenet, instead relying on his memories of films. The science fiction aspect of the film revolves around the ability to reverse the entropy of things and people, resulting in time reversibility. While the film does refer to real concepts from physics, among them annihilation, the second law of thermodynamics, Maxwell's demon, the grandfather's paradox, and Feynman and Wheeler's absorber theory. Washington, Pattinson and Debicki were cast in March 2019. Each of them was only permitted to read the screenplay while locked in a room. Nolan chose Washington based on his performance in The Black Klansman in 2018. Washington kept diaries in which he expanded the protagonist's backstory. Pattinson took some of Neil's mannerisms from the political journalist and author Christopher Hitchens. And Kat was originally going to be an older woman, but Debicki's appearance in Widows in 2018 convinced the filmmakers otherwise. Now, I am generally a massive Christopher Nolan fan, from films like Memento, The Prestige, and of course, the Dark Knight trilogy, to a film like Inception, which was just so original and so clever back in 2010. For me, however, he has somewhat lost his way, as it were, per se, as a director, from films like Dunkirk in 2017, and now this film, Tenet. I found this film to be mixed and almost all over the place. Now, don't get me wrong, there are parts that are very entertaining, and it really is a cerebral movie, but it lacks in some aspects, and can be overly confusing at times. And for me, this film lacks the cerebral spectacle that a movie like Inception was. In saying all of that, though, I could see this film has the makings of a cult film, with its failed release due to the pandemic and a muted critical reception and twisty narrative that demands multiple viewings. It's one of those films that I'd feel maybe if I watched it a few more times that I might begin to enjoy more, as it is incredibly layered, nuanced, and complicated. It's an incredibly bold piece of work and very challenging, and Nolan, I must give credit to, doesn't shy away from these type of projects. Here we are dealing with an incredibly complex narrative foundation in terms of backwards moving entropy, non-linear thinking, temporal paradoxes, and the question of what really is time. For me, though, all of this doesn't play into a movie that adds humanity, and that's what this movie lacks. It lacks raw emotion, and I almost feel the film becomes too complicated for its own good. John David Washington is competent as the leading role here, but he certainly doesn't have the charisma that he had in BlacKkKlansman. For me, it's Debicki's performance that really stands out here. She plays her role really well, and has persuasive chemistry here with Branagh in their joint portrait of a violent, dysfunctional love-hate relationship. Branagh for me here plays a sort of atypical James Bond baddie, in really what proves to be a waste of the actor's finer abilities. I was, however, very impressed here by Robert Pattinson, whose career has really grown in leaps and bounds as he becomes a much more fleshed out, deeper and more well-rounded actor. All in all, like I say, I have to commend the bravery of this project. It couldn't have been an easy one to take on, and Nolan is so good at doing that. It just doesn't reach the heights of, say, some of his previous works, especially when you set such a high bar. You do, unfortunately, expect a lot from a certain filmmaker. Now, the visuals are completely dazzling and fantastic, as you would expect in a big-budget film like this. But one gripe I had with the film was the sound mixing. At times, I found it difficult to hear the main characters, as the music and the action sequences seemed to bombard their dialogue. I also found this in Christopher Nolan's film Dunkirk, so I'm not too sure if this is a choice that he's choosing to make. In saying all of that, though, this is a bold, original take of a movie that on paper might have looked really fantastic in Nolan's eyes, but never really sort of lives up to the expectations that it was set before its release. Tenet gets a 6 out of 10.